All right, we are live here, Ruckus Makers, and I am joined by Brantley Turner, who, drawing on 25 years of China-based work and 10 years as the founding principal of the only Sino-U.S. independent cooperatively run high school approved by the Ministry of Education in China, Brantley is consistently ahead of conversations that others are having about globalized education for the 21st century. Driven by a belief in the power of disruption, Qibao Dwight is a living laboratory that allows those within it to experiment with the assumptions and worldviews that we all hold and the ways those can hinder or empower us to advance. She is committed to restless innovation in leadership and management, school improvement, and a cutting edge arts program that drives student outcomes unmatched in China. This unique school setting is used as an example for policymaking in Beijing that shapes education in China and around the world. Brantley is recognized for her pioneering work with East-West school leadership and impeccable Chinese communication skills. Welcome to the show, Brantley.
Thanks, Danny. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So you worked in Chinese schools for a while. Tell us a story where you were really pushed out of your comfort zone.
So I hear that bio and I start to think, yikes, it sounds so intense. But, I do think the whole experience is just a collection of stories and wonderful, challenging, different human stories. Truly, though, I was pushed out of my comfort zone daily. So I spent 10 years in China, starting and running Qibao Dwight, and 23 years in China, or in and out of China total. And obviously, I've got so many stories about questions that you maybe can't ask in necessarily a Western context, but I feel like I've been asked everything. I used to go to the hairdresser and he would tell me if I looked like I'd gained 7 pounds or 4 pounds or lost weight since the last time I saw him. I would show up at school and have my colleagues tell me, wow, you looked a lot better yesterday. And I just think that the stories are all around, how to learn how to be vulnerable and absorb that candid communication and just get you out of your own head.
Yeah. That's interesting. The hairdresser, story. It reminds me. So my wife is Zimbabwean. I don't know if you know that, but within her Shona culture, when you show up, if it looks like you've been eating well, they'll say, "Hey, you're looking fat," right? And it's actually meant to be a compliment because that means you have resources, you're eating well, and that kind of thing. And so it's just really interesting, right? Having those cultural experiences. Can you tell me a little bit, just maybe about yourself and putting yourself in that situation and interacting, right, in new and interesting and different ways? How did you do that successfully, right? Because some of that feedback you got, it's like it could be jarring, right? And these are the easy examples that you shared.
Absolutely. I think that if we think about ruckus making and your whole mission and theme, the reality is that I walked into a situation not necessarily, certainly not on paper, a ruckus maker, pretty uptight, pretty tightly wound, even throughout schooling and college, good student. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My parents are from the South. My dad's from Alabama. My mom's from Tennessee. Spent a lot of time down there growing up. So it was kind of like that paradox between Brooklyn and South Alabama. And that really carried me and stewarded me into China when I hadn't spent much time abroad, didn't grow up traveling a lot. And when I was 17, my parents moved to Hong Kong. I didn't go with them. I was about to go to college, but it just opened this opportunity for me to start accessing, particularly mainland China, because my mom was working in Beijing. And it was just about saying yes to stuff and embracing things and just, slowly kind of shedding that I don't know, wall or shield or whatever it was that I felt like had been kind of, driven by my own culture and the rawness of stepping into a new culture. Well, you don't know the rules, so you don't know if you're playing by them or not. And, just getting interested. I was really into history, just generally like reading history, learning history. So China has a lot of history, and I started learning the language, and it gave me access to people and their stories, which is really what makes the history. And it just stayed interesting. And just to put people, like to anchor them in time, started going to China in 1993. That'll be 30 years ago this year. I was 17, and that was the arc. I mean, China has ridden an extraordinary arc over the last 30 years. I consider it, a major privilege to have been involved in, going from like witness to participant in that whole system, and the good, the bad, and the ugly, and a lot of lessons learned. But just to be honest, like my prevailing mindset of the whole experience is just say yes to stuff, even if you have no idea what you're getting yourself into.
Tell me more about that though, because for some ruckus makers listening, that could be quite scary, right? And require substantial courage just to say yes, especially when you don't know what's on the other side. I've learned to embrace that too, because for me, I view it as a coin, right? There's fear in whatever could happen, right? On one side, adventure, opportunity, and excitement on the other. But yeah, how do you say yes in those moments?
Particularly with starting the school that I started with a co-principal in China, a Chinese woman by the name of Wang Fang, we really got to this place where we felt like if we can get comfortable with the worst case scenario, we can do this. And we would walk through what in our different definitions is something that we can't live with. And if we can get comfortable and live with every other aspect of this, we can keep moving forward. And a big part of that lesson also was collaboration and cooperation, having somebody I was on the journey with. So in that school founding, I was hand in hand with a colleague the whole way through. And the other part of it is just, in a lot of ways, I mean, I'm here on the podcast and the show today. I am way less qualified, esteemed, prepared than most of your guests, and certainly a lot of your listeners, I'm sure. And that has served me well. No one would have made me a head of school. I do not have the credentials that that a lot of folks in the world are carrying. I have subsequently tried to build those, like speaking to your constant, learning and ongoing learning aspect of ruckus making. And just sort of being willing to say, I know I'm not the expert. How can I find the people that are? How can I ask for help? I often say, like, hire the smartest people and get out of their way. I think that served me well. I don't think I know everything. I know I don't know everything. Goodness. I mean, certainly China taught me that, and I feel that way in the US too. So being curious, but also being really respectful of difference and different approaches and ways of thinking. And just, it's not even a leap when you feel like you can build a team to get through something with you.
Right. Yeah. That team part is really important, right? And I think you said something to the effect of hiring smart people and getting out of their way. Do you have any tips for the ruckus maker watching or listening in terms of how you attract these sort of A-player ruckus makers to the team? Especially right now, at least in the US. I don't know if this is true in China too. But finding teachers, finding administrators is a great challenge. And sometimes the bar is just, do they have a pulse, right? Let alone, are they the right fit and an excellent team member? So how do you approach that?
For sure. And I mean, I think we got to add the caveat, right? That teaching is so hard and leading schools is so hard. I mean, it's so underappreciated, understood. The pandemic, you thought it would help us out on that, didn't necessarily do so. First of all, I would start by saying, not in my bio, what is not kind of updated yet, but is the new information is I'm in New York at the moment because I'm primarily working on developing our newest Dwight school, which is going to be in Hanoi, Vietnam, opening in 2024. So I left China, got back to New York, spending a lot of time in Vietnam. And that's a whole new experience. I can't speak Vietnamese. I certainly have tons to learn about the culture and the context, but I'm getting this brilliant opportunity to build that team, and just started and hired a couple of folks. So I really connected with that idea of where are people going to come from, right? In this great resignation, like, where am I going to find people? And the real challenge is, I'd love to say I throw away the resume, but life has also taught me that if I only do that, I might wind up with some problems when I really dig in on the school, competence set. So I wouldn't say just blow it all up. I think you are looking for certain characteristics of how folks feel about students, what their dedication to the craft is. Are they inspired? Like, are they ready to challenge themselves? That's a huge part, not only just what can they teach and what are their credentials and, what's their degree. I think you need a balance, but then I'm a big assessment center fan. So certainly for leadership posts in schools, I like to design a really comprehensive assessment center, not just panel interview, ask questions about the resume, but really putting people through tasks, trying to design
Mm-hmm.
tasks that challenge the teacher or the leader as much as they indicate who we are as a school group, the Dwight schools,
Right.
and what our culture is, right? So pull in the Dwight schools has 7 schools around the world, and I pull in colleagues from Shanghai, Dubai, Seoul, et cetera, all to participate in that assessment and to give feedback. And so again, I guess I come back to that theme of don't do it alone. Look, use
Yeah.
your networks, collaborate, try to pull in as many different types of CVs as you can, but then don't just go with your own gut. Like use your
Mm-hmm.
team to
Mm-hmm.
check your bias to sort of get you straight if you're not seeing clearly, what's going to work in this particular position.
Yeah.
So I don't have any magic answers, but also just do
I
your
think you
homework.
do
Like,
actually.
Yeah, do your
Yeah.
homework.
Well, I think the assessment center was some of the
Hmm.
magic. I don't,
Oh, good.
let me reflect back to you because I
Hmm.
haven't heard that term before, Brantley.
Okay.
But what I'm hearing is, yeah, okay, there's the panel, there's the usual questions, that kind of stuff. But even more importantly, there's some kind of performance task, some real world uh, thing that the applicant's going to do, which lets you see how they think through problems, maybe how they collaborate with others, so on and so forth, how they work. But it also gives them a taste how you do things at your school so that they know potentially what they're getting into. Do I have that right so far?
Absolutely. So maybe it's helpful if I give a really specific example of something I recently
That was
assessed
my
on.
next question. Yeah, totally.
Okay, call it an org chart, a management chart, some kind of chart.
Okay.
We basically all have them at schools.
Hmm.
And we can bust it up. And right now for Hanoi, our chart's a circle and students are at the center. And I feel really good about like the graphic impact of this collaborative wheel. But at the end
Yeah.
of the day, it's still an org chart. And maybe it's not right. Maybe it's needs changes. And so one of the tasks that we designed was all the folks at this different positions, higher, lower level, kind of in that org chart, got the org chart and they told us what was wrong with it. And they shared their vision for what they liked and how they would change it. And it was brilliant because not only was I crowdsourcing wonderful people who wanted to join the school's
Yeah.
deep kind of engagement with this chart, but also then learning from them where they thought we were making mistakes. Like, was tech connected enough to teaching and learning? One person's opinion, it wasn't. And so from that, I created a different job called Director of Innovative Learning. And the beauty of startups is you can do that, right? So I definitely
Totally.
have more of the startup experience, and a lot of folks are listening from much older schools and established schools. But why not use hiring new people to even test some of those existing structures that you have,
Mm.
and get them to write it down? Because the other thing about it is we talk a lot about managing for diversity and cognitive diversity being one strand that's very important. But do we really speak to that? I mean, if people don't interview well, then are you
Mm.
creating parts of your process that give them that space? And you may have a great interviewer who's terrible on paper or doesn't take a task seriously. Or you may have
Right.
a great paper task person who you want on your team because they can write, but they don't speak well, or they're
Hmm.
nervous. And so I've just found that, like, not only doing the solid work of please help us improve this school or create this school, but also help us manage for your needs. So I know how I'm going to manage you or support you to do your best work, which probably looks really different than my best work.
Hmm. Great example. Thank you for sharing that, Brantley. So your China experience was a lot about paradox. How did you hold ideas that seem to be at odds, with each other? Um, yeah, and just deal with those paradoxes as they came up.
I always started by thinking about our students. We were
Right.
educating in China, primarily Chinese national students, grades 10 through 12, only high school because of the way the regulations work in the younger grades. And these are students, in our case, doing international baccalaureate, full diploma, extraordinarily rigorous global curriculum in English, non-native speakers, generally native speakers of Chinese. And I just went to them. How do my students take 4 Chinese national subjects, history, politics, geography, and Chinese language, and hold the IB and make space for the critical thinking required in the IB, the challenging, the questioning, the why of the IB? And I would start with that and just say to myself, all right, first of all, these 15-year-olds can do this. So hats off to them first. Second, if they can do this, what is it about them? It's because they're striving, they're yearning for something, they're trying to access something. And I just said to my mom the other day, we were at a basketball game in New York watching my 9th grader play. And I told her that I thought the greatest gift that I had been given was the ability to put myself in a daily basis back into the shoes of how I felt when I was 15. That to me is the beauty of teaching, because you stay connected to like the struggle and the pain, because you see it on your students' faces or in their lives every day. And so that's what I do. How did I deal with it? I didn't say, let me change my value system. I said, let me try to walk in the shoes of that value system and see what I can get from it, or how I can counsel people to think or feel differently. As opposed, and I guess my motto for that is I really try to focus on getting it right, not being right. And getting it right can look really different. And it's really hard to not want to be right.
Yeah, that's a good distinction too between getting it right and being right. So thank you for sharing that. Well, Brantley, I'm loving our conversation. We're going to pause here for a second to get some messages in from our sponsors. And when we get back, I'd love to talk to you about how you work with people where you might not actually agree with their ideas and how they want to move forward, which is an essential skill, right, as a leader. Well, learn how to successfully navigate change, shape your school's success, and empower your teams with Harvard's certificate in school management and leadership. You could get online PD that fits your schedule. Courses include leading change, leading school strategy and innovation, leading people, and leading learning. Apply today at betterleadersbetterschools.com/Harvard. Today's podcast is also sponsored by TeachFX. And teachers use TeachFX to record a lesson and automatically get personalized insights into their classroom conversation patterns and teaching practices. See TeachFX for yourself and learn about special partnership options for ruckus makers at teachfx.com/BLBS. And today's show is also sponsored by Organized Binder, a program which gives students daily exposure to goal setting, reflective learning, time and task management, study strategies, organizational skills, and more. Organized Binder's color-coded system is implemented by the teacher through parallel process with the student, helping them create predictable and dependable classroom routines. You can learn more and improve your students' executive functioning at organizedbinder.com. And we are back with Brantley Turner. And, Brantley, when you say China, or people think about China, a certain set of ideas and beliefs and assumptions, probably come up for the ruckus maker listening. And from your experience, what have you learned about leadership and how to work with ideas and or people that you might not necessarily agree with?
I know that, at the top of the podcast, I'm sure some folks thought like, yikes, I don't know if I want to go into this, because obviously you've had other podcasts on how the Asian education system works. And, that's not really where we're going today, right? It's not about us versus them. And I think that's really key, because I think, first of all, I had the privilege of always having what I would call my kind of like safe circle. So I heard many things a day, 30 times a day, that I thought, ooh. By the way, you can hear that in the US too. Change the timetable, going to do this, going to have after school. Okay. So it's certainly not to say that it would only be, but I mean real intercultural, like, I don't think I'm going to get comfortable with that. And I always had my inner circle to be like, whoa, like couple texts after the admin meeting, like, for real, you have to have that group. And I never had a situation where I didn't have somebody that I could go to and say, I don't know about that. And those were people who were both, of Eastern heritage or Western heritage. It wasn't to say like, I just ran to the Americans to talk about that. Sometimes it was the American who had the idea we didn't like, right? So part of that is also then like removing the country. I hate, people will say like TIC, like this is China. I'm like, nope, I don't do that. I don't do that, because that's creating that tribalism that we all
Yep.
need to get away from. If people just want to label you and box you up and like say, Brantley's all about this or all about that, like, no. We're not going to do that, in the sense that that's not going to be what we accept as a way of starting dialogue. So I think that, again, create that safe space so that you do have people you can kind of sound off to, and you can do that safely and comfortably. 2,
Right.
flip it. You do this a lot on the show, like flip it and sort of say, okay, I'm going to try to, like, you're going to need to help me get there. And I did that daily, particularly with the Chinese principal Wang Fang. That was our actual title. Mine was American principal. Hers was Chinese principal. So we were like walking in those national shoes daily. And
Yeah.
and I would just say, look, this is going to be really hard for me to like wrap my head around. So I need you to talk to me about why, and make people do the work. I mean, an example would be, you want to introduce a new tech platform at school. We've all done it if we're school administrators. You're dealing with whoever you're dealing with. Don't go in with one. I would never do that. I would never have one option. I would never have one quote. And it amazes me how often that's the case. And I really had to hone in a market where I was going to be resisted a lot or challenged a lot. And I use tech as an example because you can't use Google in China, and you can't use Facebook, and you can't use YouTube, and you can't use Instagram. So, okay, knowing those are not on the table, I need to bring in systems that don't challenge, but still get me where I want to get. Okay, I'm going to really research 3. And I'm going to bring all, and I'm going to tell which one I want. But I'm going to really listen if somebody wants something else. And I'm going to try to really understand. And so again, just another theme of your show is trust. I had to build trust before I got to that point where we could have comfortable and uncomfortable conversations that were actually productive. And it took time.
Awesome. Thank you, Brantley. And I'm personally curious, first I admire that you could speak, read and write Chinese. What an incredible skill. But now you're moving to Vietnam and founding, a new school, and that's not the case with Vietnamese. So how are you approaching that challenge?
It's terrifying. But you know what is happening, and I'm really trying to embrace, is I have time. I can actually think. I was in a constant situation in China where I might be one of the only people translating a conversation for folks that couldn't communicate. And that takes a lot of mental brain power space. And what would wind up happening is I would translate with like no time to process the idea. And so one of the things that I'm doing for myself this year is valuing that time and space to process ideas in a way that I think I value so much more, because I used to like know everything that was going on around me all the time. I couldn't disengage, like whether at a restaurant or in a meeting. And so because I also don't know what people are talking about in Hanoi when I'm there, I try to use my other senses to focus. And so I'm just trying to be really deliberate and really intentional, working on my email communication, not long narratives, using bullets, getting straight to the point, answering the question in the first line, all these skills that I didn't need to utilize because I was able to communicate so seamlessly. So taking it as an opportunity, I guess.
Awesome. And when I think about you creating that space, right, to be able to process and that kind of thing, creating space makes me think of resting too. And so how can rest be a form of resistance?
Love it. Trisha Hershey. I don't know if you've been reading that, but she has a book out at the moment, right, called Rest is Resistance. And I'm all about rest. She does have the ministry of nap. I don't know if I'm there in the sense that I may not always honor that as a value, but rest is everything. I said at the leadership training at the beginning of the year in New York, I know we revere and we should revere Ruth Bader Ginsburg, nothing but respect. But I know one of her tropes was that she slept like 4 hours. And I think to myself, well, what if she slept 8? I mean, man, how amazing. Yeah. So I'm a real believer, shut it down, go to sleep. I don't do the all-nighters. It tortures me for my students that sleep and lack of sleep is a value for, especially for these IB kids, like striving for these exams. I walk, and I know, I guess maybe that's my form of meditation. I'm like a walking meditator. I walk a lot.
Hmm.
I have this really crazy image that my phone sent me this week, which was in the lockdown in Shanghai. I quit. I didn't walk for 61 days, and it goes blank and it goes dark, and then you see the curve come back up, and just how critical that is. So I get a lot of my ideas from just hitting the road. And it's another thing I think we school leaders really have to fight for, that ability to do the walking
Hmm.
meeting, to do the walking phone call, and just remembering to get out of the office and walk the building. So I would say that's another way I almost rest by taking that walk.
Yeah, that's so good. And before we get to the questions I ask everybody at the end of the show, hopefully I'll remember my 3 points. We'll see. But rest is huge, right? And in our leadership community for school leaders, um, we talk about the Ruckus Maker mindset tool, and it's the fundamentals: eating, sleeping, moving, meditating, and unplugging. But all of it's like fundamental, and a lot of it's about renewing your energy. There's this performance coach, Dr. Michael Gervais, and essentially he says, like, on the world stage, right? Like, top performers, they don't talk about working hard because everybody does that. And so really the interesting thing that they all discuss is, like, how are you recovering? How are you resting? Because that's how you meet that top performance. Okay, point two was I read recently, I don't remember the article, so I can't attribute it, but it just was talking about how actually walking meetings are so much more productive, um, because it gets you out of the usual traditional, like, me and you looking at each other and talking and that kind of stuff. And if you're out in nature and your mind's kind of wandering as well, you get a more authentic response. So we just encourage, the ruckus maker watching or listening to see how you might play with walking and connecting with your staff and students. And then the last piece, and I've told this story before, so here's the, like, 10-second version. First draft of Mastermind, my book, which is now a bestseller, the first draft, terrible, of course. And when I had to figure out how to make it better, it was through walks with my puppy in Berry Park in Syracuse, New York. And so I love walking, and thank you for highlighting that. Okay, so on to the last few questions everybody gets, Brantley. If you could put a message on all school marquees around the world for a single day, what would your message be?
I have so many, but I think ultimately it's the spirit of cooperate. It's harder to not, it's easier to not cooperate. And just, I want to focus global mindset, schools around the world, we've got to cooperate. We can't solve the world's problems if we don't.
Yeah, awesome. And if Brantley was building her dream school, right, and there were no constraints in terms of resources, your only limitation was your imagination, what would be the 3 guiding principles building this dream school?
For me, one is always starting with context, because what works for a given culture or context doesn't work everywhere else. And so that's why I'm always fascinated by what we can learn from other school systems in other places. But I just don't march with that. Let's put what works in New York and Hanoi. We can learn and adapt, but you've got to know the context and do all that hard learning and research, and listen to your local colleagues if you're in the international landscape on what works. And if you're in the U.S. and you're not from that part of the world, or that state or that neck of the woods, do the research and learn, because context is everything in educating young people. 2 is definitely build the team, and every team looks different. And a startup team from school A is not necessarily the right startup team for school B. So again, like, valuing that context and then building the team that's going to meet your mission in that context, and doing everything you can, make that faculty strong. That's who then serves, the most important third sort of stakeholder priority is the students. And while I think we all should point to that as the mission of our schools, it's really about what is working for them and what is not. And we can have every idea, but if we don't come back to either, like, the action research mindset or the really listening, shadowing our students for a day, figuring out what their life is like, how does the timetable work for them, then we spend a lot of time talking without, to me, getting to the heart of the issue. So I'm yet to know what my own dream school looks like, but I think always those 3 points in any culture or environment steward you in the right direction.
Awesome. All right. And we covered a lot of ground today, Brantley. So, of everything we discussed, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
Challenging the status quo sounds like a really big thing. It's like
Mm,
asking a teenager, what's your passion? And I feel like the question could be intimidating. So, what I want to do is inspire everybody to say, most of you probably do it as educators, even if you don't feel like you do. But if you really can't, and if you can't figure out a way to challenge the status quo in your context,
mm,
move, take a break, get out, try something different. Don't leave the profession if you can. We need every teacher we can get,
yeah.
but move abroad. You've done that in your own life. I've done that,
Hmm.
and that movement, that disruption. So if you don't feel like you're challenging the status quo in your current context, find a way to disrupt even yourself. Move your body, get out.